The Shin family requests your immediate attention.
The Korean Mafia boss laughed when his family threw me out pregnant. Now they're begging for the hair they threw away. The family that threw me out pregnant and called it. Management waited exactly 91 days after my son was born to decide they wanted him. Not me, never me, him. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream paper, the Shin crest pressed into the wax like they were still living in a century that had agreed to fear them. I was in the kitchen of Kwon Deo's house with Jae-won asleep against my chest, his impossibly small hand curled into the collar of my shirt, when Park Sung-min set it on the counter and said, very quietly, "You should sit down before you open this." I did not sit down. I have learned that the people who tell you to sit down are usually the ones hoping you'll be too comfortable to fight. Inside was a legal notice, formal, expensive, densely worded. But underneath the language it said one thing, in a voice I recognized. Madam Shin Bokhui's, the one she'd used to call my child, a situation that required management. The Shin family petitions for legal recognition of paternity and shared custody of the minor child, biological son and heir of Shin Tae-jun, heir. I knew what those words could turn into if a court ever agreed with them. They didn't need to win outright. Partial recognition was enough. And then it would be guardianship hearings, supervised visitation, Shin lawyers and Shin guards, threaded back into my son's life for the rest of his childhood. A door into that house that would never fully close. 4 months ago, they'd offered me 6 months of severance to disappear with that hair. 4 months ago, Tae-jun had laughed, that low, relieved, private laugh, because a complicated inconvenience had finally been handled. And now they wanted him back. What changed wasn't me, and it wasn't my son. It was the math. I found out the shape of it from Mama Yoon, who knew things the way other people know their own names. She came into the nursery while I stood there holding the letter and the baby. Hands not quite steady, and she did not ask what was wrong. She took one look at the cream envelope through the open door, made a sound like a kettle deciding whether to boil, and said, "Ah!" So the old crow finally counted her eggs and found one missing. "Mama Yoon, sit, you're swaying." Hungry mother, hungry baby, tired mother, foolish mother. She steered me into the rocking chair, took Jae-won from my arms with the confidence of a customs official, and settled him against her shoulder like she'd done it for decades. Which it turned out she had. Now, you want to know why now and not before? I'll tell you, because no one else in this house will say it plainly. She told me plainly. Tae-min, the brother who'd looked mildly entertained while his mother arranged my exit, had 3 daughters and no sons. And in the Shin family's antique arithmetic, daughters did not count toward the line. Ryun was blood, but not direct blood, which left Tae-jun, who in 4 months had produced exactly no other heirs, because, as Mama Yoon put it while examining the baby's ear like a jeweler appraising a stone, busy. Men like that are very busy, being important, and not at all busy being fathers. So the council looked at the family tree, she concluded, and found one healthy boy at the top of it, and that boy, she tapped Jae-won's noses, and he scrunched it in his sleep, is sleeping in my house, eating food I approved. Under the name of the one man in this city, the Shins cannot frighten. She looked at me over the top of her enormous reading glasses. They are not coming for a grandson. They are coming for a trophy. There is a difference. And you will remember it the whole way through this. I did remember it. All the way through. Kwon came home earlier than usual that night and read the letter once at the kitchen island, his jaw doing the thing it did when something offended him deeper than anger. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He set the letter down and lined its edge up neatly with the counter. A small, precise gesture I'd learned meant this is now mine to handle, and said, "They cannot have him. They're saying he's Tae-jun's. Legally. Biologically. They have a case. They have a name on a chromosome." He said it the way you'd describe a stain. That is not the same as a claim. Blood is what you are born with. A father is what someone chooses to be. He looked at me, and for once he let me see all of it. I chose the day I sent that car, I chose. They are 4 months late to a decision I already made, and I do not lose to people who are late. From the doorway, Mama Yoon, who simply materialized wherever the conversation was most interesting, said, "Good. Now stop talking like a movie and marry the girl, because a married father with his name on the birth registry is a wall, and a boyfriend is a door." There was a long silence. Kwon turned slowly to look at his grandmother. "Halmoni," he said. "I was going to do that privately." "You were going to do it slowly," she corrected. "Which, in your case, means I will be dead. I have great-grandchildren to spoil and a finite number of teeth." Privately, she waved a hand and shuffled toward her program. "Do it in the garden. The light is good in the garden. I already told the florist." I stared after her. "You already told the florist," I repeated. "She tells everyone everything," Kwon said, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has been managed by an expert his entire life. Then he turned back to me, and something in his face changed, went quieter, went truer, and I realized that whatever he'd planned to do slowly, he was about to do now, in a kitchen, with a legal threat sitting on the counter between us. "Lena," he said, "I had a hole, there was a plan. There was supposed to be a plan. There usually is. Marry me." He didn't kneel. He didn't perform it. He said it the way he'd said, "Don't go to a hotel, I'm sending a car." Like a fact he had already decided was true, and was simply giving me the chance to agree with. Not because of the letter. The letter just made me stop pretending I had time. "Marry me because I built a reason for you to stay, and I am tired of leaving the door open and waiting. Close the door from the inside, stay." I thought about a man who protected things quietly, who tucked blankets and left no note, who sat on a cold kitchen floor beside an exhausted pregnant stranger and simply stayed until she was ready to stand. "Yes," I said. From the next room, without looking away from her television, Mama Yoon called out, "Finally, the florist is on standby. Sungmin, write it down before he changes his mind." We married 11 days later in the garden. And I want to tell you about the wedding mostly because of Mama Yoon, who treated it less like a ceremony and more like a military campaign she had been waiting her entire life to command. She vetoed 3 caterers. A wedding where the soup is lukewarm is a funeral with flowers. She wore a hanbok in a shade of imperial gold so aggressive that 2 of Kwon's security detail quietly asked if it was a uniform. And when the florist nervously presented the white and cream arrangement she had personally ordered, Mama Yoon studied it a long moment and said, "Where is the red? A wedding with no red is 2 strangers signing a contract. Put red in it. The boy has waited long enough to look like a man in love. Let him at least be surrounded by the colour of it." There was red in it. I walked toward Kwon across a garden full of late autumn light and ridiculous, last-minute red peonies, holding Jae-won because I refused to do this without him. And Kwon, the man whose face gave nothing away to anyone, looked at the 2 of us coming toward him and had to look at the ground a moment to collect himself. Mama Yoon, seated in the front row in her imperial gold, said loudly, to no one, to everyone, "There it is. I told you the garden light was good." When the officiant asked if anyone objected, she swiveled in her seat and scanned the small crowd with the slow, theatrical menace of a woman who had brought a list and was hoping. Nobody objected. "Smart," she said, and faced front again. That night, with the house quiet and Jae-won asleep, and a name on a registry no Shin lawyer could erase, I found Mama Yoon in the kitchen at midnight eating rice porridge. Of course, and sat down across from her the way I had on my very first morning, when I'd been a braced, guarded, exhausted stranger. "Thank you," I said, "for the door, for telling me to close it." She pushed a second bowl across the island without being asked. "You closed it yourself. I just reminded you that you had hands." She studied me. "Eat. Tomorrow the crow comes for war, and you cannot win a war on an empty stomach. Nobody can. This is why generals lose bad breakfast." I ate. The crow came for war. She didn't come herself at first. Madam Shin never did her own carrying. That was what the family was for. She moved the council instead. Within 2 weeks of our marriage, 3 of Kwon's smaller agreements hit sudden, inexplicable friction. A shipping partner went quiet. An official discovered a problem that hadn't existed the week before. Pressure, the underworld kind, the kind that arrives wearing a suit and an apology, and its message was simple. Give us the boy, and the friction goes away. Kwon absorbed it without a flicker. One evening, I heard a single sentence through the cracked study door. Tell them every door they close, I will buy the building. And tell Shin Bokhui that pressuring me through cargo is beneath a woman who used to be feared. She is embarrassing herself. He didn't know I'd heard it. He never brought it up. By morning it was done. The official who'd invented the problem was abruptly transferred. The shipping partner called to apologize. And the building Madam Shin had used for leverage quietly changed owners overnight. Kwon never mentioned any of it. Sungmin simply set a folder on the desk and said, "The doors are open again." That was when I understood that Kwon fought the way he loved, completely, and without ever needing anyone to watch him do it. Taejun tried a different door. He tried me. He caught me outside a pediatric clinic, which meant he'd had me watched, which meant he was more desperate than the letter let on. Alone, no aid, looking for the first time since I'd met him, like a man who hadn't slept in months. "Lena, please, 2 minutes." I had J1 in the carrier against my chest. I did not take a step toward him, and I did not take a step away. "He's my son," Taejun said. Quiet, almost pleading. "Whatever happened, whatever I did, that doesn't change what he is. He has my blood. He's a Shin." And here is what I'd learned in the months of cold libraries and warm porridge. I was not angry anymore. The anger had burned out into something cleaner and more useful. "He has your blood," I agreed. "He'll never have your name." Because the night your mother called him a situation and you laughed. You laughed, Taejun, a man who'd met me exactly twice picked up a phone and sent a car. You had 2 years. He had 1 phone call. That's the whole difference between you. I made a mistake. You made a choice. My son sighed against me in his sleep, and the last thread of whatever I'd once felt for this man went slack and fell away. You chose your mother's table over us. He chose us over everything. J1 will grow up knowing exactly one father. The one who chose him. Go home. There's nothing here that's yours. I walked to my car. He didn't follow. When I told Mama Yoon about it that night, she listened with her chin propped on her fist. And when I finished, she nodded slowly and said only, "Good speech. Next time, also step on his foot. Words are for the soul. A stepped-on foot is for the memory." The grandmother summit was Madam Shin's idea, and it was a mistake, and I will treasure it forever. She requested, summoned, really, a private meeting between the women of the 2 families to resolve this with dignity, imagining, I think, a cold and elegant negotiation. 2 matriarchs, 2 cups of tea, an arrangement reached over the heads of sentimental young people. She did not know what she was inviting. Mama Yoon prepared for that meeting the way she'd prepared for the wedding, as a campaign. She wore more pearls than the wedding. She brought her own tea, because she did not trust the crow's tea. You do not drink what your enemy pours. This is not paranoia. This is manners. And she insisted I come, and sit, and say nothing unless she nodded. Let her swing at the old woman. The old woman has been swung at by better. Madam Shin opened the way she always did, with a blade wrapped in silk. "Your grandson is powerful," she said, pouring tea that went untouched. "But power is not standing. The child is a Shin. The bloodline matters. Surely a woman of your generation understands tradition." Mama Yoon set down her own cup with a small, satisfied click. "I understand tradition," she said warmly. "I am older than your tradition. I remember when your husband's father was a boy stealing rice cakes in Busan, before your family decided it had always been important." She smiled. "Tradition is wonderful. It is also a story rich people tell to explain why they should keep getting their way. I have heard it many times, usually right before the family in question falls." Madam Shin's expression cooled by several degrees. "You're being. I am being honest, which I understand is unusual in this room." Mama Yoon leaned forward, and all the comedy left her face for exactly 3 sentences, and I saw, for the first time, fully, why a woman this small had never once seemed small. "You called that baby a situation. You called his mother a girl like you. You sent her into the cold with an envelope, and you let your son laugh." And now your tree has run out of branches, and you want the one fruit you threw away. No, you do not get to be cruel and lucky. Pick one." The silence was extraordinary. Then Mama Yoon sat back, picked her own cup up again, and said brightly, "More tea. Oh, no, you didn't drink yours. Suit yourself. Lena, we're leaving. This woman's hospitality is as cold as her grandmother instincts." She rose, took my arm, and paused at the door for the kill. "Bokhui, one more thing. The boy's first birthday is in 3 weeks. You're not invited. But I know you'll come anyway. People like you always come to see what they lost. So wear something nice. Everyone will be watching you." It was, I realized later, not a taunt. It was a trap, and Mama Yoon had been setting it the whole time. A Korean child's first birthday, the doll, is not a party. It's a declaration. This child survived. This child is loved. This child belongs to people who will fight for him. At its heart is the doljabi, the baby set before a spread of objects, free to grab one, and whatever he grabs is said to foretell his life. A brush for a scholar, a coin for wealth, a thread for long life. We held Jaewon's doll in Kwon's great hall, and we did not hide it. Mama Yoon invited everyone, every ally, every associate, every significant family in the city. She wanted witnesses. I didn't understand how many until the room was full. And as promised, Madam Shin came, with Taejun and Taemin, uninvited, draped in the cold confidence of people who still believed that showing up was the same as winning. They waited until the doljabi, until the room was at its warmest. My son in his tiny hanbok, seated before the spread of objects, the whole hall leaning in to see what he would reach for. They waited for the softest possible moment to be at their hardest. I saw them move toward the floor, and so did Kwon's men along the wall, who shifted to cut them off. I lifted one hand barely and stopped my own side. Let them, I decided. For months I had been spoken about, managed, decided over like furniture in someone else's house. Not tonight. I wanted every witness in this hall to hear the Shins say out loud exactly what they had come to claim. Before we answered them, Madam Shin stepped forward, and her voice carried. She'd practiced carrying. "Before this charming little performance continues, I think every important person here deserves to know the truth about that child's blood. He is a Shin. No garden wedding changes what runs in his veins. We have come to claim what is ours." The room went still, the dangerous kind of still. And Taejun, God help him, looked at me and tried one final time in front of everyone. "Lena, let's end this. He belongs with his real family." Kwon started to rise. But Mama Yoon got there first. She didn't stand quickly. She couldn't. She rose the way a mountain would rise if a mountain had heard enough. Slow, total, every pearl catching the light. She walked to the center of the hall, looked down at the baby, then up at Madame Shin, and smiled like a woman about to enjoy herself enormously. "His real family," she repeated. "Yes, let's talk about that, in front of everyone. You wanted witnesses. I wanted witnesses. Funny how that worked out." She lifted one hand. Park Sungmin stepped forward with a small device. "You see, my grandson's people are very thorough. They watch every household that touches his world. They were watching yours long before this girl ever walked out of it. Which means we have, how do I say it, receipts." She nodded at Sungmin, and Madam Shin Bokhui's own voice filled the great hall, recorded, crisp, unmistakable. "There is a situation that requires management." A man's voice bored Taemin. "What kind?" And Madam Shin again, calm as still water. "The clean kind." The room inhaled as one. Then, because Mama Yoon was a finisher, one more clip. The kitchen. "You really thought you were going to be a Shin? A girl like you." And then, unmistakable, low and relieved and damning, Taejun's laugh. It landed on every powerful face in the hall. The dawning understanding of exactly what the Shin family had tried to do to a pregnant woman and her child. And exactly who had just stood up at a baby's birthday to call him theirs. Mama Yoon let the silence do its work. Then she spoke, and her voice was no longer warm. It was the voice of a woman who had buried a husband, raised an empire's worth of men, and outlived every single person who had ever underestimated her. "You did not lose this child because you were unlucky," she said. "You lost him because you threw him away. And then you laughed. And everyone in this room just heard it. No court in this city, no table in this underworld, will hand a discarded heir back to the family that called him garbage." Not now, not in front of all these eyes. She turned to the hall, and the warmth flooded back into her like a tide. Now, the Shins are leaving. Someone open a door for them. They're so fond of putting people out of them. Nobody laughed yet. It was too sharp for laughter. And then I stood. My own feet, my own choice, no one's hand on my arm. I walked to the spread of objects, lifted my son into my arms, and turned to face the people who had called him a situation. You can keep the bloodline, I told them, and my voice did not shake. It was never the part that mattered. He has a father who chose him, and a family that fought for him, and a name no court will ever take. That isn't blood, that's belonging. Go home. Then I turned my back on the Shin family, the first time in my life I had ever done it, and looked only at my son. Madam Shin opened her mouth. For the first time since I had known her, no sentence came out. She looked at the room, searching, the way I had once searched a council table for a single ally, and found 100 powerful people who had just decided, quietly and completely, to turn away from her. She left. Taemin followed. Taejun was last, and at the door he stopped and looked back at me, and at the baby in my arms, and made that sound again. The fractured, involuntary one from the gala, the sound of a man understanding the size of what he'd thrown away at the exact moment understanding becomes useless. And then he looked at Jaewon one last time. Really looked. And for the first time I think he saw a son, and not a bloodline. A boy. His boy who would grow up calling another man father, and never miss him. Whatever broke in his face then, he carried it out the door with him. Then the door closed, and this time it stayed closed. For a moment the hall didn't know what to do with itself. Mama Yoon fixed that. She clapped her hands once, briskly turned back to the objects, and announced to the stunned room at maximum volume. Well, now that the trash has taken itself out, the baby still has to grab something. This is the important part. Everyone, watch. Jaewon, choose wisely. Your great-grandmother bet a significant amount of money on the brush. And the laughter came then. All of it, all at once, the whole braced room releasing into something that felt, against every odd, like joy. We set my son back in front of the objects, and 100 of the most dangerous people in the city held their breath to watch a 1-year-old in a tiny hanbok make the first decision of his life. Jaewon looked at all of it very seriously. Then he ignored every object, reached past all of them, grabbed 2 fistfuls of Mama Yoon's pearls, and laughed. Aha! Mama Yoon threw both hands in the air, like she'd won the lottery. He chooses family. And good taste. This is the smartest child ever born. Sungmin, did you film it? Film it again, he'll do it again. Kwon's arm came around me. I felt him laughing. Actually laughing. The steadiest man I'd ever known, undone for the second time, by something smaller than his forearm. He pressed his mouth to my hair and said, "Lo, just for me." He grabbed the pearls. He's going to be exactly like her. God help us all. God help us all, I agreed. Here is what I know now that I did not know in that cold kitchen, holding a severance envelope. I used to think being chosen was the finish line. It isn't. Being chosen is just the door. Staying chosen, building something solid enough that the people who discarded you can never reach back and unmake it, is the part nobody warns you about. The part that takes a marriage, a name on a registry, and a tiny, terrifying grandmother with a recording and a list. Taejun spent 2 years deciding I wasn't worth claiming, and 1 terrible moment deciding my son was. He had it backwards, the way men like him always do. Value isn't what makes someone family. Choosing them when they have nothing. That's the thing. Kwon chose me on a pavement. Mama Yoon chose me over a bowl of porridge. And my son, handed 100 objects meant to predict his future, reached past every one of them for the people who had fought for him. My name is Lena Cross, Kwon. Now, though Mama Yoon insists the pearls are the real family name, and she may be right, they threw me out pregnant and called it management. They came back for the heir and called it tradition. We didn't win because we were powerful. We won because we were honest, and we were home, and the people who wanted us small never saw how big love had quietly made us. If you've ever been thrown out of a room that couldn't hold you. Somewhere out there, your car is already coming, and if it hasn't arrived yet, eat something, Mama Yoon would insist.